"I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, your name isn't on the list for tonight." The young man at the registration table said it kindly, the way people say things when they already suspect it's going to hurt. He checked his tablet, scrolled, checked again. "Maybe under a different spelling," I offered. "I've looked twice," he said. "Bennett, Bennett, Bennett, I don't see it anywhere. Are you a guest of the Voss family?" "I'm her grandfather," I said. "Lily's grandfather." He winced just slightly, the kind of wince that told me this wasn't the first time tonight something had gone wrong, and it wouldn't be the last. Behind him, through a pair of glass doors, I could see the ballroom of the Ashford Preparatory Academy lit up gold, round tables dressed in white linen, a slideshow looping silently on a screen at the front, photographs of graduating seniors, academic medals, a violin held up mid-bow. One of those photographs was my granddaughter. 17 years old, top of her class, first violin in the regional youth orchestra. The reason I had driven 90 minutes through rush-hour traffic in a jacket I hadn't worn since my own retirement dinner, carrying a small wrapped box that held a card, a check I didn't plan to give her in front of anyone, and a photograph of her grandmother holding her the week she was born. "Would you like me to find someone from the family?" the young man asked. Through the glass, I watched my daughter Rebecca laughing with a cluster of women I didn't recognize, her hand resting on the arm of a man in a navy suit who was not her husband. I watched Trevor, my son-in-law, stand near the podium shaking hands with people who all seemed to already know each other, the easy way men shake hands when they're being introduced as somebody important. And near the dessert table in a pale blue dress stood Lily, my Lily, laughing at something, tossing her hair back exactly the way her grandmother used to. None of them looked toward the door. None of them were looking for me. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think that's necessary." I set the wrapped box down on the registration table, gently, the way you'd set down something you weren't ready to let go of but had run out of reasons to keep holding. "Would you make sure Lily gets this? Just leave my name off it if that's easier." The young man looked like he wanted to ask more questions. He didn't. I turned around, walked back through the marble lobby of a school I had paid 4 years of tuition for, and drove home in silence. My name is Arthur Bennett. I'm 66 years old. I spent 38 years as a structural engineer. I buried my wife 3 years ago, and until that night, I believed there wasn't a single thing I wouldn't quietly do for my daughter and her family. That drive home is the reason everything that came after happened the way it did. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you sacrificed for, hit subscribe and drop a like before we go on. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. I should explain something about tuition and about my wife before I explain what I did next. Diane and I married young. We didn't have much in the early years: a rented duplex, a used Buick that stalled at red lights, a wedding so small her own aunt didn't hear about it until after the fact. What we did have was a fierce, almost embarrassing belief that education was the one gift nobody could ever take back from a person. Diane's father had been a machinist who never finished 8th grade and spent his whole life apologizing for words he mispronounced. She never forgot the way that shame sat on. "When we have grandchildren," she used to say decades before we had any, "I want them to walk into any room in this world and never once feel small." So when Rebecca had Lily, and Lily turned out to be the kind of child who read chapter books at 5 and asked her preschool teacher genuinely difficult questions about gravity, Diane and I started a fund. Quietly. We didn't announce it at Thanksgiving. We didn't need anyone's gratitude. Diane used to say that real generosity doesn't ask to be witnessed. The private tuition started in 6th grade, when Lily's public school cut its music program, and she came home in tears because there was nowhere left for her to play. Rebecca and Trevor were stretched thin. Trevor's contracting business was still finding its legs, and between the mortgage and 2 car payments, there wasn't room for $4,000 a semester at Ashford Prep. Diane kept a small ledger in the back of her recipe box, of all places, tucked behind a card for her mother's pot roast. She'd started it the year Rebecca was born, long before there was any grandchild to speak of, writing down small sums whenever we had a little extra, a bonus from my firm, a tax refund, the modest inheritance from her aunt. Lily's fund wasn't even the right name for it back then because Lily didn't exist yet. She used to say that Hope was the only kind of savings account that paid you interest before you'd even made the first deposit. By the time Rebecca had a daughter of her own, that someday account had quietly grown into something substantial, helped along by decades of restraint neither of us ever talked about outside our own kitchen. We drove the same two cars for 11 and 13 years respectively. We took exactly one vacation a year, always somewhere within driving distance, always somewhere Diane had researched down to the last dollar. People sometimes mistook our frugality for a lack of means. It was never that. It was purpose aimed decades into the future, at a child who hadn't been born yet. I remember the phone call. Rebecca, 29 years old, trying so hard not to sound like she was asking, "Dad, I know it's a lot, she loves it so much." "Send me the account information," I said. "I'll set it up on Autopay. You don't have to think about it again." And she didn't. For 6 years, on the first of every month, $4,100 moved out of my retirement account and into Ashford Preparatory Academy's tuition system without a single conversation, without a single thank you card, without either of us ever mentioning it out loud again. Diane used to joke that it was the best-kept secret in the family, better kept than my surprise 60th birthday party, which frankly hadn't been much of a surprise. When Diane passed, 3 years ago, I kept the payments going without missing a single month. It felt like the one promise of hers I could still personally deliver on, month after month, long after she couldn't watch Lily grow into the young woman she'd hoped for. I never asked for credit. I never wanted a plaque with my name on it. I only ever wanted to know Lily was becoming exactly the kind of person who could walk into any room and never once feel small. I did not expect that the room in question would eventually be one I wasn't allowed into myself. Looking back, there were signs. There always are. We just don't want to read them while there's still time to do anything but hope we're wrong. The invitation to Lily's honors night had arrived by email, forwarded from Rebecca with no note attached, just the subject line still reading, FWD, Ashford Prep Spring Honors Gala Voss Family Table. Not "Dad, hope you can make it." Not even a smiley face. Just an attachment. I'd called to confirm the time. "Just come whenever," Rebecca said, sounding distracted, a hairdryer running in the background. "It's kind of a whole production this year. Trevor's parent." "Should I sit with you all?" A pause, half a second too long. "There's assigned seating, actually. The school does it. I'm sure it's fine, Dad, don't overthink it." I should have asked more questions. I didn't, because I never imagined a school dinner required strategy. Diane always said I was the kind of man who trusted doors to open simply because I'd never been the one standing outside of one. There was also this. A month earlier at a family barbecue, Trevor's father, a retired airline executive named Douglas, a man who wore his golf handicap like a personality, had asked me over burgers what I did for a living. "Structural engineer," I said. "Retired now." "Huh," Douglas said, like I'd told him I used to sell vacuum cleaners door to door. "And Trevor tells me the girls' school is quite the place. Ashford Prep. Very competitive admissions, I hear. Must be proud of how you two have built that." I remember opening my mouth. I remember Trevor, 3 feet away, suddenly extremely interested in his hamburger bun. I remember Rebecca's hand finding my forearm under the table, a small, quick pressure that I understood, even then, as a request. "Don't." So I hadn't. I'd said something vague about Lily being a gifted kid who'd have gotten there on scholarship money eventually anyway, and the conversation moved on to golf. I didn't understand that day that I had just watched my son-in-law quietly rewrite the story of his own life in front of me, and that I had just as quietly agreed to let him. The drive home from Ashford Prep felt longer than 90 minutes. Somewhere around the second highway exit, I pulled into a gas station I didn't need gas from, and I sat in the parking lot with the wrapped box still on the passenger seat because in my confusion, I realized I'd never actually let. The young man at the registration table had asked, but somewhere in the walk back to my truck, I'd tucked it back under my arm without deciding to. Inside the box was a card I'd written 2 nights earlier. I'd sat at Diane's old desk, the one with the wobbly left leg I kept meaning to fix, and written out, in my worst handwriting, something I'd meant to say out loud to Lily that evening instead. Your grandmother believed the whole point of an education was so that no one could ever make you feel small. Watching you walk across that stage tonight, I think she'd say we did exactly what we set out to do. We are, and always have been, so proud of you. I never got to say it. I sat in a gas station parking lot, 66 years old, and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since the week of Diane's funeral. Then I drove the rest of the way home, hung my jacket in the closet, and did not sleep. The next morning, I made coffee the way I always did, too strong, black, in the mug Lily had painted for me at a pottery class when she was 9, a lopsided blue bird on a white background that Diane used to say looked more like a confused chicken. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and logged into my bank's website. I found the recurring payment easily enough. 6 years of muscle memory made it almost automatic click into bill pay. Find Ashford Preparatory Academy, view the schedule. $4,100, first of every month, next payment due in 11 days. I sat there for a long time, longer than I want to admit. This wasn't about the money. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to make this into a story about a bitter old man protecting his wallet, and that isn't what it was. I had more than enough to cover Lily's tuition through graduation and beyond, and I would have done it gladly, the same as I always had, if the phone call the next morning had simply been, "Dad, I'm so sorry, there was a mix-up with the seating and I feel terrible." Nobody called, not that night, not the next morning, not the morning after that. I checked my phone obsessively for 2 days, the way you check a wound to see if it stopped bleeding. Nothing. Rebecca posted photographs from the honors night to social media, Lily on stage accepting her academic medal, Lily flanked by Trevor and his parents, Lily's arm around a woman I now recognized from behind the glass doors as Trevor's sister, flown in from Chicago. A caption that read, "So proud of this incredible young woman. We did it, kid. Proud family, Ashford Prep, we did it." I read those 2 words perhaps a dozen times. I thought about 6 years of Autopay. I thought about Diane's father and the shame he carried for words he never learned to pronounce, and the promise we made before we had grandchildren of our own. I thought about a wrapped box sitting somewhere in a school office, addressed to nobody in particular. I clicked into bill pay again, cancel scheduled payment. Are you sure you want to remove this recurring transfer? I did not hesitate the way I thought I might. Yes, I said out loud to an empty kitchen and clicked confirm. Then I closed the laptop, fed the cat, and went out to trim the hedges, because Diane always said unfinished yard work was the fastest way to lose an entire Saturday to feeling sorry for yourself. I woke up the next morning half expecting to feel something enormous guilt, maybe, or grim satisfaction. Instead, I felt almost nothing at all, which surprised me more than either would have. I made my coffee. I read the paper, the actual paper, the way Diane and I always had, spread out over 2 cups because neither of us could ever finish the crossword before the coffee went cold. I noticed, with something close to embarrassment, how much lighter my calendar felt with nothing on it, no gala to dread, no seating chart to wonder about, no small performance of pretending everything was fine. For 6 years, $4,100 had left my account before I ever had the chance to spend it on anything else. I hadn't resented that, but I also hadn't realized, until it stopped, how much of my own life I had quietly deferred in the process. That week, I finally called the contractor about the roof leak I'd been patching with a tarp since spring. I bought a decent pair of hiking boots to replace the ones with the sole peeling off, the ones Diane used to threaten to throw away herself if I didn't retire them first. Every purchase came with a flicker of guilt. You're only doing this because you cut off your own granddaughter. And every time, another voice quieter, steadier, sounding uncomfortably like Diane answered back. You didn't cut off your granddaughter. You stopped funding people who forgot you existed. My neighbor, Walt Higgins, a retired postal worker with 3 grown sons of his own, came by that Thursday to borrow my ladder. He found me on the back porch, boots up on the railing, reading an actual novel for the first time in years. "You look different," he said. "Can't put my finger on it." "I canceled something," I told him. "Something I probably should have canceled a long time ago." He nodded slowly, the way men our age nod when they understand a thing without needing the details spelled out. "Took my youngest boy 14 years to figure out how to change his own oil," he said. 14 years because I kept doing it for him every single Saturday so he wouldn't have to ask. Best thing I ever did for that boy was throw out my own set of jack stands. "Hope it works out that clean for me," I said. "It won't," Walt said cheerfully and clapped. "But it'll still be right. For 11 days, nothing happened. I want to sit with that for a moment because it tells you almost everything you need to know. 11 days between the moment I canceled that payment and the moment anyone noticed. 11 days in which nobody in that house wondered how I was doing, whether I'd made it home safely from the drive, whether the wrapped box had ever found its way to Lily's hands. 11 days of silence from the family I had quietly, faithfully supported without complaint for 6 straight years. Then on the 12th day, at exactly 9:14 in the morning, my phone rang. "Rebecca." I let it go to voicemail, mostly out of habit, mostly because I was in the middle of recaulking the upstairs bathtub and had grout on both hands. By the time I wiped them clean and checked the screen, there were 4 more missed calls stacked beneath the first, then 6 more. Then, over the course of the next 40 minutes, while I stood at my kitchen counter watching the screen light up again and again and again, the number climbed past 20, then 40, then, finally, when I stopped watching and simply let it happen, 63. 63 missed calls in 40 minutes. Interspersed between them, texts began arriving in a rapid, increasingly frantic sequence. "Dad, call me. Dad, the school says our account is 30 days past due. Is this a mistake? Dad, they're saying tuition wasn't paid. Please call. Dad. Dad, Lily can't sit for her AP exams if the balance isn't cleared, please. This is time sensitive." Not one message asked how I was. Not one mentioned the gala, or the seating chart, or a wrapped box left with a stranger at a registration table. Every single word was about the account balance and Lily's exam eligibility, as though the two of us had simply had a clerical misunderstanding, rather than a father who'd been made invisible at his own granddaughter's biggest night. I sat with my phone in my hand and thought about something my old boss used to say, back when I was young and new at the firm, about the difference between a crisis and an inconvenience. A crisis threatens something you can't get back. An inconvenience threatens something you were counting on for free. For 6 years, I had let my family believe tuition was simply a feature of the universe like sunlight, something that arrived on schedule and required no one's attention or gratitude. Now that it had stopped, what alarmed them wasn't the silence between us. It was the invoice. Somewhere around the 52nd missed call, I finally sat down at the kitchen table and listened to the voicemails in order, the way you'd read a diary someone else had written about their own unraveling. The first was almost calm. "Hey Dad, it's me. Just got a notice from Ashford about the account, probably nothing. Call me when you get a chance." Ordinary. Unbothered. The voice of a woman who still believed at 9:14 that morning that the universe owed her family a function. By the 4th voicemail, the calm was gone. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening. The school is saying the balance hasn't moved in over a month. Please. I need you to call me back. This is important." By the 9th, something closer to panic had crept in. "Dad," Trevor's freaking out. "They're saying if it's not resolved by Friday, Lily might not be cleared for her AP exams. Do you understand what that means for her transcript? Please, please call me." By the 14th, panic had curdled into something uglier. "I don't know what kind of point you're trying to make right now, but this isn't the time. This affects Lily. Not me, not you, Lily. I really hope you understand that. I sat with that last one for a long time. This isn't the time," as though there had ever been a scheduled window, some designated slot on a shared calendar, for me to have feelings about being erased from my own granddaughter's proudest night. As though my absence from that ballroom had cost nothing, but my absence from a spreadsheet was a 5-alarm emergency. I thought about something my old firm's senior partner used to tell young engineers who wanted to skip the load calculations because a deadline was tight. The stress doesn't disappear because you stopped measuring it. It just waits for the part of the structure that isn't watching. For 6 years, I had been the part of this family structure nobody thought to measure, because I never buckled, never complained, never once made anyone late for anything by asking for what I needed. I had absorbed weight quietly for so long that everyone around me had simply forgotten weight could be redistributed or removed. I finally answered on the 64th call. "Dad, thank God," Rebecca said, breathless, before I'd even said hello. "There's something wrong with the tuition payment. The school's saying we're a month behind. I don't understand. Did the bank make some kind of error?" "No error," I said. "I canceled it." Dead air. I could hear her exhale, slow and unsteady, the way you exhale when you've just been told something you weren't prepared to hear. You canceled it. On purpose." "On purpose," I confirmed. "Why would you do that, Dad? This is Lily's education." "Do you understand what you're doing right now?" I closed my eyes. Out the kitchen window, a pair of finches were fighting over the last of the sunflower seed in Diane's old feeder, the one I still refilled every Sunday because it felt like the closest thing to talking to her I had left. "I think you should come over," I said. "In person. I'll explain everything then." "Dad," in person, Rebecca. My voice stayed even, the way it always had in 38 years of engineering reviews when a younger colleague wanted to argue with a load calculation instead of checking the math. "I'll see you tonight." I hung up before she could argue. "Before we get into what happened when she walked through that door, if this story has you hooked, make sure you're subscribed and tap that like button. It really helps this channel grow. Now, back to the story." She arrived at 6:40, alone, without Trevor, without Lily, wearing the kind of forced calm I recognized because it was mine. The same expression I used to wear walking into rooms where I already knew the news was bad and had decided in advance not to let it show. She sat down at the kitchen table without being asked, in the same chair she'd sat in as a teenager doing algebra homework while Diane made dinner behind her. "Okay," she said. "I'm here. Explain it." Why wasn't I invited to Lily's honors night? Her face did something complicated, surprise first, then something closer to guilt, quickly smoothed over. "You were invited. I forwarded you the email." I stood at the registration table, I said. "My name wasn't on the guest list, not at any table, nowhere in the building. That has to be some kind of school mix-up. I'll call them Monday, Rebecca." I kept my voice gentle, but I didn't let her finish. I need you to stop handing me an explanation before you've even asked whether it's true." She stared at the table. The grandfather clock in the hallway, Diane's grandmother clock, actually, one of the few things she'd inherited that we'd never once considered selling even in leaner years, ticked through a long, uncomfortable silence. "Douglas didn't want a scene," she finally said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Trevor's father. He's been introducing Trevor around his circle differently the last couple years, positioning him as this self-made guy. Successful contractor, provides well for his family, put his kid through private school on his own steam. It's good for the business, Dad. Half of Trevor's new clients came through Douglas's country club connections." And I complicate that story. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. So the plan, I said slowly, was to keep me out of the room entirely, not seat me somewhere quiet in the back. Remove me completely so that if anyone in that ballroom asked how you'd managed private school tuition on a contractor's salary, there'd be no elderly man in a bad blue suit standing around to complicate the answer. Her eyes filled, but she nodded once small. I told myself it was just for one night, she said. I told myself you'd never even. I did know, I said. I stood outside the glass doors and watched all three of you laughing with people I've never met, while a 19-year-old at a registration table apologized to me on your behalf. Rebecca pressed both hands over her face. When she finally lowered them, her mascara had smeared at the corners, and for a moment she looked less like a woman in her late 30s and more like the frightened 9-year-old who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am so sorry, Dad. It was cruel and I knew it while I was doing it, and I did it anyway because Trevor said. He said it would only be one dinner. He said Douglas's opinion mattered for the business right now, and once things stabilized, none of this would matter. And has it stabilized?" Her silence told me everything her words hadn't. I want to pause here because this is the part of the story people always assume is simple, and it isn't. I did not enjoy watching my daughter cry at my kitchen table. I have loved Rebecca since the moment the nurse placed her, red-faced and furious, into my arms 39 years ago, and nothing that happened afterward changed that. But love, Diane used to say, is not the same thing as rescue, and somewhere over the last 6 years I had confused the two so thoroughly I could no longer tell them apart. "Tell me about the business," I said. She hesitated. "It's fine, Rebecca." She exhaled, long and shaky. "It's not fine. It hasn't been fine for almost 2 years. Trevor lost the Hendricks contract last spring, some dispute over the framing timeline, and it set off this chain reaction. 2 crews he had to lay off. A lawsuit from a supplier he still hasn't settled. He's been floating payroll on credit cards some months. And the tuition. You paid the tuition," she said, and something in her voice cracked wide open. "You've paid the tuition since 6th grade, Dad, every single month. Trevor's parents don't know that. Nobody at that gala knew that. As far as they're concerned, Trevor built a successful company and pays for his own daughter's education like a self-made man, and I let them believe it because—" She stopped. "Because it made him look good," I said. "Because it made us look good," she said. "Because if people knew the truth that we've been living on my father's money for 6 years while pretending otherwise, I don't know what that does to Trevor. He's already barely holding it together. I thought I was protecting my marriage." "You were protecting an illusion," I said, not unkindly. "And the illusion needed somewhere to put me where I couldn't be seen. That's what hurt, Rebecca. Not the money. The money I would have given freely, the same as I always have. What hurt was realizing that somewhere along the way, I became something to be hidden rather than someone to be thanked." She didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. There was a long stretch of quiet after that, the kind that isn't empty so much as full of things neither person has decided how to say yet. I got up and refilled both our coffee cups, more out of needing something to do with my hands than any real desire for more caffeine. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said when I sat back down. "And I want an honest answer, not the kind you give me to make me feel better. All right. Are you doing this because you're angry at me, or because you're angry at Trevor?" I considered the question longer than she probably expected me to. "Neither, really," I said finally. "I'm not interested in assigning blame like it's a pie that needs cutting into the right-sized pieces. I'm doing this because somewhere in the last 6 years, I stopped being your father and started being a line item. And I don't think either of us noticed exactly when that happened, which is the part that scares me most. It wasn't one decision. It was 100 small ones, and every single one of them was easier than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "Honesty," I said. "Uncomfortable, inconvenient honesty, delivered on a schedule nobody asked for." Your mother used to say that families don't usually break because of one big betrayal. They erode slowly, because it's always easier to protect someone's feelings for one more day than to have the hard conversation today. 6 years of easier days added up to a man standing outside a glass door at his own granddaughter's honors dinner, wondering if anyone inside remembered his name. Rebecca wiped her eyes again, more roughly this time, like she was angry at her own crying. "I keep thinking about how normal it felt," she said. "Not inviting you properly, just assuming you'd understand, assuming you'd be fine with whatever version of things made life easier for the rest of us. When did that become normal? I don't know," I admitted. "But I think it starts the moment somebody realizes you'll absorb almost anything without complaint. After that, absorbing things quietly stops looking like generosity to the people around you. It starts looking something to be managed rather than someone to be considered. That's an awful thing to realize about your own family. It's an awful thing to realize about yourself too," I said, "because I let it happen. I could have said something after the first year. I could have asked at any point to simply be included the way any grandfather expects to be included. I didn't, because I told myself it was generosity to stay quiet. Some of it was. But some of it, if I'm honest, was fear that if I ever asked for anything back, the whole arrangement might stop, and I'd lose the closeness to Lily that money had quietly become a substitute for." Rebecca looked up at that, something shifting in her expression. "Is that why you never said anything? Not even once in 6 years?" "Partly," I said. "And partly because your mother raised me to believe that real love doesn't keep score. I still believe that mostly. But I've learned there's a difference between not keeping score and letting yourself be erased. Your mother wouldn't have tolerated the second one for a single day, and I think some part of me has been trying to live up to that lesson ever since she's been gone, even when I was failing it badly." The doorbell rang before either of us had recovered enough to speak again. Rebecca startled, wiping quickly at her eyes. "That's probably Trevor," she said. "I texted him where I was." I opened the door to find not Trevor but Lily. She stood on my porch in jeans and an oversized university sweatshirt from a college she hadn't even applied to yet, hair pulled back in the messy bun she wore when she'd been crying and didn't want anyone to notice. "Grandpa," she said, and her voice broke on the single syllable. "I found the box." She held up the small wrapped gift I'd left at the registration table 12 days earlier, the paper slightly crumpled now, the corner torn where someone, a well-meaning school administrator, probably had opened it to confirm what was inside before storing it safely in the lost and found. "They found it in the office this week," Lily said. "Nobody thought to give it to me until today. I read the card, Grandpa. I read what you wrote." I stepped aside and let her in. She walked past her mother without acknowledging her, straight to me, and hugged me the way she used to when she was small enough that I could still lift her clean off the ground. "Why weren't you there?" she asked, pulling back, looking between me and Rebecca with the dawning, furious clarity of a teenager who has just realized the adults around her have been lying, and lying specifically to protect themselves rather than her. "Mom said you couldn't make it because of your knee." "That's what you told me." Rebecca's face went pale. "I didn't say that exactly. You said his knee was bothering him and he sent his love." Lily's voice climbed, sharp with the particular betrayal only a 17-year-old can properly deliver. "You said that in the car on the way there so I wouldn't ask questions during the actual event. Was that true?" Silence. "Was any of that true?" "No," Rebecca finally admitted, barely audible. Lily turned to me. "Then where were you?" "I was outside the doors," I said gently, "for about 10 minutes. Then I drove home." "You drove 90 minutes and they wouldn't even let you in. They didn't put me on the list, sweetheart." I watched something shift behind her eyes, not just anger at her mother, but a slower, more complicated reckoning, the kind that happens when a young person realizes the adults who raised her have been rewriting reality in front of her for longer than one single dinner. "Who paid for?" Lily asked, turning to face her mother directly. All these years, who actually paid? Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it. I want to hear it from you, Lily said. Not from Grandpa, from you. Your grandfather did, Rebecca finally said. He's paid for it since 6th grade, all of it. Lily turned back to me, and for a moment in the yellow light of my front hallway, she looked exactly like her grandmother, the same steady, searching eyes, the same refusal to let a silence pass unexamined. Every month, she asked. Every month, I confirmed. And Dad let his own father tell everyone at that gala that he did it, that he built all this. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I heard him, Lily said, quietly now, almost to herself. On stage. He said, we worked hard to give her every opportunity. Grandpa's not a we. Grandpa's not even in the room. Trevor arrived 20 minutes later, having apparently gotten the same worried text from Rebecca that had summoned her here in the first place, though clearly a slower and more reluctant version of it. He walked in already talking, the way anxious men sometimes do when they are trying to control a conversation before it starts. Arthur, listen, I don't know what's going on with the tuition account, but the school called me today and it's incredibly embarrassing. We've got Lily's exam eligibility on the line, and I really think whatever's happened here. Sit down, Trevor. Something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. He looked at Rebecca's face, then at Lily's, then finally at me, and something in the room's temperature seemed to register with him for the first time. What's going on? He said, no longer performing confidence. I canceled the tuition payment, I said. The same tuition payment I have made without interruption every single month for 6 years. I canceled it after I drove 90 minutes to watch my granddaughter accept an academic honor from behind a pane of glass because my own name had been removed from every guest list in the building. Trevor's jaw tightened. That was a school administration issue. Don't, Lily said, and the single word landed with more force than I could have managed myself. Dad, I already know. Mom told me. Grandpa's been paying for Ashford since I was 11 and you stood on that stage 2 weeks ago and told 200 people it was you. Trevor's face went through several colors in quick succession. It's complicated, Lily, your father-in-law, grandfather, Lily corrected, quiet and precise. You mean my grandfather. He's not your father-in-law tonight, Trevor. Tonight he's just the man you erased from my life so your dad would keep sending business your way. I have thought many times in the weeks since about what it must have cost Trevor to sit in my kitchen and hear his 17-year-old daughter say something that clear, that unflinching, in a voice that carried absolutely none of her mother's old habit of softening bad news for the comfort of the person delivering it. Diane would have loved her for it. I loved her for it too, more than I think I'd ever loved her before, watching her refuse the same easy silence the rest of us had been trained into. I can explain the business situation, Trevor said, turning to me now, his voice dropping into something closer to genuine desperation. Arthur, it's not permanent. We had a rough 18 months. My father's connections could really turn things around if I stay invisible, I finished. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I want you to understand something, I said, and I made sure to look at all three of them as I said it, Rebecca, Trevor, and finally Lily, whose eyes had never once left mine since she'd walked through my door. I never asked for recognition. Diane and I started that fund because we believed in what an education could give a child, full stop. I would have paid that tuition silently for the rest of my life and never said a word about it, if the story being told about that money had simply been true, even if the truth was just my family loves me and includes me. What I could not accept was paying faithfully for 6 years to fund a lie that specifically required my absence to survive. Dad, I'm so sorry, Rebecca said, crying openly now. We'll fix this. I'll tell Douglas the truth, I'll tell everyone, just please don't let this affect Lily's exams. That decision isn't only mine to make anymore, I said. I'll reinstate tuition through the end of this school year for Lily's sake because she didn't ask for any of this and shouldn't be the one paying the price for it. But I want something in return. Anything, Rebecca said immediately. Not money, I said. The truth. Told plainly by the two of you to Douglas, to your friends, to whoever attends the next event I'm expected to disappear from. I want my name back in the room, not because I need the credit, because I refuse to keep financing my own erasure. Trevor stared at the floor for a long moment. When he finally looked up, something in his expression had changed, not resolved exactly, but cracked open in a way that might eventually let something honest through. "Okay," he said. "You're right." Lily walked me to my truck that night. The porch light caught the side of her face, and for one strange, suspended second I saw Diane so clearly in her that my chest ached. "I'm sorry about the honors dinner," she said. "I didn't know any of it was happening. I would have said something. I would have made them stop." "I know," I said. "You couldn't have known what you weren't told." "I want you at graduation," she said. "Not standing outside some door, at the table, with my name card right next to yours." "I'll be there," I said. "Front row if they'll let me." She hugged me again, longer this time, and when she pulled back, she was smiling the particular smile Diane used to wear when she'd finally won an argument she cared about. "For what it's worth," Lily said, "Grandma would have been furious tonight, but she'd have been so proud of you for canceling that payment. She always said the truth costs more up front, but it's the only thing that doesn't come with interest." I laughed, surprised, because it sounded so exactly like something Diane would have said that for a moment I almost believed Lily had heard her say it herself, though Diane had been gone almost a year before Lily was even born. "Where'd you hear that?" I asked. "Mom told me once," Lily said. "Said Grandma used to say it whenever anyone tried to cut corners on something." I drove home that night with the windows down, even though it was cold, because I wanted the wind loud enough to drown out my own thoughts for a while. I thought about 63 missed calls in 40 minutes, and what it meant that not one of them, not a single one, had simply asked whether I was all right. I thought about a wrapped box sitting in a lost and found for 12 days, waiting for someone to notice it mattered. I thought about Diane's father and the shame he carried his whole life for an education he never got the chance to finish, and the promise we made, decades ago, in a rented duplex with a stalling Buick in the driveway, that no child of ours would ever be made to feel small. I hadn't broken that promise. Not really. I had simply stopped letting people mistake my love for something that required my disappearance. 2 weeks later, I drove to Ashford Preparatory Academy again, this time for a much smaller occasion, a spring recital. No gala, no seating charts, no guest list at all beyond a folding table with a sign-in sheet anyone could walk up to and write their own name on. I signed in as Arthur Bennett, grandfather. No one stopped me at the door. No one checked a tablet 3 times looking for my name. Lily played second violin in a string quartet that evening, a piece I didn't recognize but liked anyway, something slow and deliberate that built toward an ending you could feel coming a full measure before it arrived. Rebecca sat 2 seats down from me, and though we hadn't fully repaired what 12 days of silence and 6 years of hidden money had worn thin between us, she reached over at one point and squeezed my hand, the way she used to when she was small and scared. Trevor sat on my other side. He hadn't said much to me since that night in my kitchen, but he'd shown up, and he'd shown up on time, and when the quartet finished, he was the first one on his feet applauding small. Not everything, but real. Afterward, in the parking lot, Douglas Trevor's father approached me directly for the first time since the burger conversation months earlier. "Trevor tells me you've been the one behind Lily's education this whole time," he said, extending a. There was no apology in it, not exactly, but there was something adjacent to respect that hadn't been there before. "That's a hell of a thing to do quietly for 6 years. It wasn't meant to be a secret," I said, shaking his hand. "It just turned into one." "Well," Douglas said, glancing toward Trevor, who was helping Lily carry her violin case toward the car, "I suppose some secrets aren't worth keeping." I watched them walk ahead of me toward the parking lot, my daughter, my son-in-law, my granddaughter, Still an imperfect family working through something I doubted would ever be entirely resolved. But Lily glanced back once, checking that I was following, the exact way she used to at 5 years old, crossing a parking lot, making sure her grandfather hadn't been left behind. I hadn't been. Not this time. I got in my truck, started the engine, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I drove home without a single thing left unsaid. It would be a tidy ending to say everything was fixed after that. It wasn't, and I've never trusted the stories that claim it was, because I've lived long enough to know that trust doesn't rebuild itself on a single good evening any more than a cracked foundation repairs itself, because the weather turned nice for a week. Rebecca and I talked more in the month that followed than we had in the previous 2 years combined. Some of those conversations were easy. She'd call just to tell me about her day, the way she used to before marriage and motherhood filled up all the spaces where casual conversation used to live. Others were harder. One Sunday afternoon, sitting on my back porch with 2 cups of coffee going cold between us, she finally asked the question I think had been sitting underneath everything since that night in my kitchen. Did you ever resent us? All those years, quietly paying for everything, watching us take the credit. I thought about it honestly before I answered, because she deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort. Not until the gala, I said. Before that, I never once felt like I was owed anything. Your mother and I didn't build that fund so we could collect gratitude on it later. We built it because we believed in what it could do for Lily. The resentment only showed up when I realized the price of my own silence had become my own erasure. That's different from being generous. That's being used. She flinched at the word, but she didn't argue with it, which told me she understood the difference too. I don't know how to fix 6 years in one conversation, she said. You don't, I told her. You fix it the same way trust breaks, one honest choice at a time, repeated often enough that it starts to look like a pattern instead of an apology. Trevor's repair took longer, and I won't pretend it was ever fully complete by the time I'm telling you this. Men like Trevor, men who have built their sense of worth on other people's perception of their success, don't unlearn that habit in a single kitchen conversation, however uncomfortable. But he did, to his credit, sit down with his father eventually and tell him the truth about where 6 years of tuition money had actually come from. Douglas apparently took it about as well as you'd expect a man like Douglas to take it, which is to say he changed the subject twice before finally, grudgingly, admitting that a father-in-law who quietly funds a child's education without asking for a single ounce of credit was, in his words, a hell of a lot more impressive than most of the men at that country club, myself included. I didn't need Douglas's approval. But I noticed, the next few times our families were in the same room, that he made a point of including me in conversations he used to steer around me entirely. Small repairs, offered by people who'd never admit outright that they were making them. Lily's actual graduation came at the end of that summer, not the honors gala, which had been Ashford Prep's mid-year celebration for top academic performers, but the real ceremony, caps and gowns, and a stage full of folding chairs on the football field. 300 families packed into metal bleachers under a sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. There was no guest list this time. No registration table. No tablet a 19-year-old had to check 3 times before delivering bad news to an old man in a suit he didn't wear often enough to feel comfortable in. I sat in the 3rd row, between Rebecca and an empty seat Lily had specifically instructed be left open in case, as she put it, Grandpa needs somewhere to put his jacket because he always takes it off 5 minutes into anything outdoors. Trevor sat on Rebecca's other side. Douglas and his wife sat 1 row back, close enough to lean forward and say something to me twice during the ceremony, both times unprompted, both times almost warm. When they called Lily's name valedictorian, as it turned out, a detail she downplayed so thoroughly in the weeks leading up to it that I hadn't even known to expect it, she walked across that stage the way Diane always said a person should walk into any room in the world. Like she belonged there. Like nothing about her presence required anyone's permission. She found me in the crowd before she found anyone else. Not Trevor. Not Rebecca. Me, sitting in the third row with my jacket already off and folded over my lap exactly the way she'd predicted, and she lifted her diploma an inch off her chest and pointed it, unmistakably, straight at me. I like to think Diane saw it too. I don't know what I believe about that. Exactly, I'm an engineer by training. Not a man given to certainty about things I can't measure, but I've decided it doesn't much matter whether I can prove it. Some beliefs are worth keeping simply because of what they let you carry forward. 6 months later, on the 1st of the month, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and logged back into bill pay. Lily was headed to college that fall, a good one she'd earned entirely on her own merits, though I'd made sure the financial piece would never again be a secret anyone needed to protect. This time, though, before I set up the new transfer, I did something I hadn't done 6 years earlier. I called Rebecca first. I want to set up her college fund, I told her. But I want it done differently this time. I want Lily to know exactly where the money comes from. I want it on paper with her name on the account, not hidden inside anyone else's story. Okay, Rebecca said, and I could hear something steadier in her voice than I'd heard in years. That's fair, that's more than fair. And Rebecca, I want you and Trevor to tell people the truth. Not because I need the credit, because I'm done financing anyone's silence, mine or yours. Understood, she said, loud and clear. I set up the new transfer that afternoon. Same amount, more or less, adjusted now for a state university instead of a private academy. But this time, when the confirmation screen appeared, "Are you sure you want to schedule this recurring transfer?" I didn't hesitate, and I didn't feel the small, quiet ache I used to feel each month without quite knowing why. I clicked yes, closed the laptop, and went outside to refill Diane's bird feeder, because the finches had emptied it again, the way they always did, faithfully, whether or not anyone was there to notice. If this story hit home for you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real stories like Arthur's. And let us know in the comments, would you have canceled that payment sooner?